Hey, thanks for joining us again at Youthology every single week for a topic in youth ministry and next gen. Listen, what is the importance of the beginning of something, right? Understanding the beginnings of something really helps us to understand its present, its why it exists. And the history of next gen ministry is a remarkable journey and quite new, actually, to be honest, only about 150 years old. In some ways, it is difficult to chronicle next gen ministry, but exciting to research when you look at the beginnings and the influence of where we are today. One of the early known youth leaders of the 20th century was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Many have seen him historically as a theologian and a Nazi activist that he was, but it is unmistakable that Bonhoeffer had a first love that many do not speak of. Okay, listen, this love of youth and children that Bonhoeffer had was a major impact on Germany and ultimately the world, because the beginnings of youth ministry could be traced back to some of his writings and his emphasis in that global space. But there are many other people, organizations, and movements that have shaped the history of next gen ministry also. There would be no way to accomplish an exhaustive review of the history of next gen ministry in just a short podcast. We've done some of this before. I've written a book on this and the history of youth ministry and the future of youth ministry. But let's just take a look today at some of the early impact of children's ministry and Sunday school on next gen. There are a lot of streams that we could choose at Parachurch. We could look at the NGOs, right, the non-governmental organizations and how they impacted youth ministry. We could look at the revivals as the first century, right, the first Great Awakening and the second Great Awakening of the 18th century, right in there, the late 1700s, early mids 1800s, and see how they formulated this massive amount of young people coming into the church, and what do we do to take care of them, right? Listen, I want to try and place a timeline of happenings that began next gen ministry in the last 150 years. Because many of them bleed into each other quite a bit. You have to kind of forgive the inaccurate overlap of maybe some years or whatever, right? And I'm sure I'm missing a couple of other smaller movements, but because so much was happening in a time frame of like 150 years, from the late 1700s into, the 1960s or, really earlier, it is almost impossible to create a readable timeline that is like an accurate continuum, right? So let's take a look at these early movements that everyone would agree would begin with Sunday school. The Sunday school movement. Wow, what an impact on the beginnings of next gen. Because really next gen is children, youth, and young adults, right? And that movement mostly began in America about 150 years ago. Early to mid 1800s, the Sunday school movement began to explode on the East Coast. And the church began with these aged group emphasis to children and youth for the training of young people who were being born again out of these revivals and awakenings called the First and the Second Great Awakening. Kind of the original small group, right, that is prevalent today in the modern church. But at the same time, in the church, what we saw happening was this emphasis of church growth and evangelism and getting smaller, actually. It's a remarkable study. One of the newest ways to do this, to grow the church, was these small groups. And we could reach communities that way. So listen to the startup. Listen to the beginnings. I want to use a compilation of articles gathered by students from Indiana Wesleyan University. What a great research they did. And they were looking at Christian education in its early formation in the church. It's a great read with citations that are more than adequate for academic work that I placed in my book called Youthology, the Study of Youth. My research found that most sources would agree with the work of these students from Indiana Wesleyan University. Using memoirs, interviews, and a widely accepted, now out of print book by Lynn and Wright, these students have left us an exemplary timeline of Sunday school study and how it impacted the beginnings, really the beginnings of youth ministry and how we do youth ministry, all influenced by the children's Sunday school, right? In an article by Robert Rakes, he's kind of considered the early father of Sunday school, of the Sunday school concept in England in the late 1780s. Rakes was trying to keep children off the streets. And so he opened up this Sabbath day of teaching the children in the inner city. Really, it was an outreach. Sunday school began in London in the late 1700s as an outreach. And what impacted this in a major way was all of the hundreds of kids that were coming, and really thousands of kids that were coming, and having to grade them and place them in different locations to disciple them. What were they going to do with them? And then we see the impact of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people in the first and second Great Awakening. And so in the late 1700s, maybe even into like 1810, right around there, we saw this movement to Philadelphia and New York City of the Sunday school movement from England. And those were the original states, Pennsylvania and New York. And this movement, let's say 1810, began so quickly because most of the great churches that were on the East Coast were adopting this way of discipling young people. Sunday school, right? In America, the first national Sunday school, they say, between 1810 and 1824, began with a stated purpose of organizing and evangelizing, and catch this word, civilizing, right? It was a comprehensive discipleship work, okay? Let's call it 1810 to 1824, okay? And the Sunday school movement in America was born. And the organization that expanded to include all ages, from children, youth, and young adult, came on the scene and became the preferred way of discipleship. So that by the late 1800s, 70 to 80 years later, Sunday school was looked upon to be the main hope for church growth, the main hope for evangelism, the main hope for wholeness and taking care of society, literally a respite or a Sabbath for the children of an area. Remarkable study that Sunday school began in communities. And by bringing the children into the church now, this Sunday school concept created life skill training, reading and writing, hygiene care, and for the older youth and young adults, vocational training. And it became the church's preferred way of doing evangelism and outreach to a community. So many organizations today that we have, the social work and welfare and humanitarian programs, come out of this concept. Come out of this concept that was born in England, moved to Philadelphia and New York City, and now expanded through the East Coast, called Sunday school, right? What a remarkable beginning that we are looking at the impact of the gospel on our young people in the context of their setting, in neighborhoods, schools, homes, and then ultimately the church. Now, there's much more to it than this, but the concept of Sunday school and the small group evolution, okay, is elementary to the development of next gen. We exist as next gen, junior high, high school, college, that older group, because of the movement of Sunday school and the children's movement. When you look at the DNA of Sunday school, it literally is the foundation and the floor of youth and young adult ministry. The historical evidence of graded, age-staged ministry to youth and children is grounded in the beginnings of the church, and one that we cannot skip moving forward. Discipleship, right? So think about that. Alongside the Sunday school model in the 19th century, we saw another movement grow up at the same time, okay? That the first and the second Great Awakenings and the influence of those movements on the thousands and the hundreds of thousands of young people who are being born again. With those revivals taking place, something had to be done to disciple the young people. So with the beginnings of Sunday school and children's ministry and its influence on next gen in junior high and high school and college, tell me, don't we need another revival and awakening again today to infuse the church, to infuse our society with a revival and awakening that impacts not only the church, but families, governments, educational systems, the private sector, entertainment? Man, do we need another awakening, an undeniable, hear me, an undeniable Christian revolution in Gen Z and Alpha Gen today. Wow, we're going to talk more about that in the next few weeks in this three-part series. I want to deal next week with awakenings and revival in a more modern sense, okay? And we'll pick that up right around the Jesus movement and bring it up to today. And what's next, right? What is next for the church, next gen, and young people in the future of the movement of next gen ministry? Coming up, okay? Listen, don't miss it. Thanks for joining us this week.